I've worked all over the world. I have thousands of Muslim friends and Catholic friends and Protestant friends and Mormons and people of no faith. For me, I think it centers around trying to apply my faith in my life personally. And so if it were my funeral and I could wave a magic wand for them to say something, I'd like them to say he was a brother to everyone he met. A year ago, my wife had been in bed for a year suffering with extreme back pain and sciatic nerve, acute sciatic nerve pain. And we'd been to 20 or so doctors and pain clinics and couldn't get any resolution. Finally, I said, we're going to have a special day of fasting for my Mormon congregation and my neighbors. And I started sending emails out to Catholic priests in Latin America and Muslims in Africa that I'd worked with for years. And we had this worldwide fast, and it was a marvelous spiritual experience of coming together in behalf of my wife, Kay, who's known throughout West Africa as Dembanuma, good mother, because we have 10 children and they're all living. They all came together with us in fasting, and that very week she started to move again, and it was a miracle. And so I've always drawn strength from the connections with those of other faiths. When I was getting my PhD, I started working with black Muslims in Cincinnati and Cleveland and Detroit, and joined the Ann Arbor, Michigan. I was at the University of Michigan, so I joined the Interfaith Association there and began to collaborate with those of other faiths. And it was a wonderful experience in coming together and beginning to appreciate each other. And we invited the BAM, which was called the Black Action Movement, this group in New York that had written the Black Manifesto calling on all white churches to repent and make good on the slavery and the exploitation of blacks through the 400 years of history. We decided in my church to invite them in. They were going to various churches and protesting and taking over meetings, and it was a big ruckus. And we decided we're going to take the initiative and prepare our congregation and invite them to come in and call us to repentance. And we were going to listen and be supportive, and we did it, and it was an amazing spiritual experience. And so from those early college years and up until this last year of this worldwide fast, I've seen such great value in brotherhood and sisterhood with those of various philosophies, various religions, various values, and it's been a rich part of my life. Raised in Salt Lake City, downtown, had a few folks from other faiths, but it was predominantly a Mormon city in those days, back in the 50s and early 60s. I tried to be pretty open. My parents taught me a lot about love and understanding, and for me, the big wake-up call was when I went on a mission to Brazil. I spent 2.5 years talking to evangelicals and Catholics and voodoo priests and lots of people, and I learned so much from them, and I learned that we have a lot of commonalities, and my life was greatly enriched by that experience. I learned to love those people of all faiths in Brazil, which is much more of a melting pot in some ways than the U.S. I've been involved and continue to go back every year since. And I work with projects in the favelas of Rio de Janeiro, in the slums in Rio, and in the rural areas of southern Brazil, and worked with bishops of the Catholic Church and multiple Protestant pastors and ministers, and mostly people just arm in arm trying to address the problems facing the human race and trying to reduce a little suffering of the poorest of the poor in those countries, like Brazil.
Do you have an experience in your life with finding something in another religion that isn't in yours
Mm-hmm.
that you really wish were there?
Mm-hmm.
And did you have to deal with that?
Yeah, I think one of my most powerful experiences the last decade or so was the time I was working in Mali in West Africa. And I'd been there for about 10 days with my daughter doing village development and setting up microfinance programs and working with women's cooperatives that we were funding so they could become develop income generating opportunities to better feed their kids and to be able to put a well in their part of the village that had clean, good water. And after about 10 days there, a guy came, I was out in one of these villages and there's no paved roads. We were in a Jeep, about 5 volunteers and myself. And we were there to dedicate a school that we had funded a year before, and we're coming back. We started building it with the villagers. They'd finished it. We went to dedicate it. And as we were milling around there, ready to start this ceremony, they had their drummers, they had the women dressed in their beautiful boo-boos, they call them, you know. And they were all excited, and we were all thrilled. All of a sudden, some guy comes up on a bicycle and says, "Is Professor Woodworth here, Werner?" And Modibo, my staff director there, said, "Yo, Werner's here." So he takes me over to this guy. He talks first to Modibo, our director, and in Bambara tells him that my father back in the U.S. had just died. And so then Modibo and this man came to me to say, "Well, you have bad news, Professor Werner. Your father died 3 days ago, and your wife has been trying to reach you. This is a place, 25 villages, no electricity, no pavement. And they'd finally figured out. She'd finally called the office in the capital, and they'd sent a guy down to tell me that my father was dead, and they were going to have the funeral in 3 days." And I was stunned because I didn't know my father had health problems. He was old, but he was going strong. And so Modibo said, "Before we start the ceremony, I have some bad news to tell you all. Professor Werner's father died 3 days ago, and he just found out now." And they all just broke into mourning. These tough Muslims. My daughter, she was 14, she started to cry. But I expected that, but I was blown away by what happened to these villagers. They all began shrieking and sobbing and crying and gathering around me with me in the middle, expressing their love and their concern. People I'd never met, most of them before. And they were so sweet and so troubled. And the Imam came out and pronounced blessing on my family, on us there in Mali, and my family back home, my wife, my brother, other family members. And it was just an overwhelming spiritual experience, an emotional experience. And I decided I needed to leave. I was going to be there another 4 or 5 days and go home and get there for my dad's funeral. He had no members of his family that were LDS. And I just wanted to be there. My brother's not LDS, so I wanted to be there with him, with my wife, who was going to be making all the arrangements. And so I had that experience of deep love and the faith of these impoverished Muslims, so concerned about this guy they called a Mormon, without knowing much about what Mormon was. And then I contrast that with what happened next, which was I go to the airport in Bamako and try to get on a flight with Air France back to Europe to get to Utah, to get across the Atlantic and get home. And they said, "No, we can't help you. You don't have a reservation until 4 more days. No, but I need to go now. Here's my ticket. Can you just tweak it and let me go?" And no, you can't do that. And these were big, tough Europeans there saying, it's a death in my family. I'm sure you care. I'm sure you understand. Can you please help me? No, we are only doing business. We are not concerned. We are professionals. And I was so blown away by that. And finally, for $1,000 more, they put me on a plane to Paris. I get there, and then I had to take Sabina Airlines to Brussels, and from there get to New York. And the same thing happened with Sabina. Sir, we are not interested in our passengers' personal problems. We are only interested in running the best airlines we can as efficiently as possible, and there's no way you're going to get on a flight for the next 2 days. Finally, I got a flight, and it was just, then New York, the same thing. So my Christian friends in France and in Brussels and in New York were all just so impersonal and so cold and so detached. And that contrast between that and what I experienced with these people deep in the villages of Wesleyan in Mali was such a contrast. That's when I really realized my faith didn't have everything I needed and wanted. And I began to think about and began to study more the values of Muslims, the ideology of Islam, and see the parallels and commonalities we have as brothers and sisters, regardless of our different faiths. One of my experiences was when I was 19 years old as a missionary for the Mormon Church in Brazil. And I lived on this island called Florianópolis, just off the coast in southern Brazil. And every morning, these 3 other missionaries and myself wake up, prepare for the day, study, pray, sing a song of Zion, and head down to the town square in Florianópolis. And as we would come down the street, we lived up by the bridge that connected the island with the mainland. As we go down this cobblestone street, as we got toward the center of town, it was about a mile down the street, all of a sudden we would start hearing yelling and accusations. And the first few times I was there, I didn't quite get what was happening, but they had installed loudspeakers in the doorways of some of the stores. As you go into the town, in the middle of the town is a park and a big Catholic cathedral. And the priest would be told by someone that here comes the Mormons every morning. And when he got the word that we were coming, he would start warning everybody that the sons of the devil are coming down the streets into the parque, into the praça, into the center park of the town, to close their shops, to not sell anything to us, not let us buy food. Don't listen to anything they're saying because they're sons of the devil. And what you want to do to be saved is turn away and ignore them. Don't debate them, don't confront them, just ignore them. After that had happened for about 3 weeks, I'd had my fill. So I decided to go down the street, through the park, up to the cathedral and talk to the priest. And we had a little debate and we had a little discussion with the microphones off, fortunately. and it was tough. He said, "You're working for Satanas. You're Satan's servants, and we don't want you in this beautiful community. It's a gorgeous place of beaches, not a big city, not crowded, not a lot of tourists, nothing like Carnival in Rio. It was just a bunch of humble people there." And I don't know. We finally got him to agree to stop doing that. And we agreed we would not say bad things about his religion if he would not condemn our Mormon faith. And that kind of settled the dust a bit, and we did a few baptisms. We never went back and apologized for it. But that was a tough time that I had not really been prepared to handle this guy who knew he'd been to theology school. He was trained, and I was a naive 19-year-old kid that didn't know what I was talking about. But it made me realize there's big differences, and I want to work to resolve those differences and come together more. So,
Well, yeah. Thank you very much for this interview.
thank you.